part 4 of The Walk. I'm going to say this in every video, but if you haven't seen the past chapters and are interested in hearing them, you can definitely check out the full playlist on my channel. It's also going to be a link in the description. If not, feel free to stick around and listen to this next part of the story. This chapter is entitled 6:30. Walking even closer, the traveler could see how decrepit the cabin looked. It was overgrown with mushy green plant life, which covered the rotted wooden logs. There were small mushrooms popping out between the shingles on the roof. The vegetation surrounding the house had not been contained in a long time, and there were remains of a fence that had almost been completely consumed by moss. The place looked ready to fall apart, and yet the traveler could see that the residence was occupied. He couldn't stop his legs from inching forward, even as a distinct hesitation overtook him. The feeling was unusually satisfying. The surreal nature of the moment was keeping his curious feet in motion. He felt an odd sense of invitation to continue towards the house. A familiar scent of firewood caught his nostrils, and the light from the doorway was glowing in a warm orange hue. The traveler continued on and reached a small stony pathway that led to the entrance. As he got closer, he could hear a distinct muttering. The voice was narrating a slew of random numbers, and he could hear it moving about the room as it rambled. 3 here, no 4. I'm sorry, 6, 7, 8. Yes, that seems right. Oh, 11 of those. Sure, why not? 16. Or is it 17? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes. The counting made no sense. The traveler could not understand it. The nasally voice was coming from what sounded like an old man. He could hear his feet shuffling around the floor, the floorboard squeaking with every movement. The traveler made sure to stay out of sight as he came even closer to the door, but he craned his neck to take a peek on what he could see inside. There was a wood stove which was small and rusted. Inside of that was a modest fire, which was the source of the thick gray smoke from the chimney. He could also see a wooden table with a few chairs. There was nothing on the table except a single candle, a plate, and a wooden cup. The traveler could also see a makeshift broom in the corner, which was tied with string and had bristles which were made with small twigs. Other than that, the place looked quite empty. He was still inching forward at a slower pace, but he found himself unable to stop as he arrived at the front door. Inside, the man with the nasally voice was pacing around and continuously muttering more numbers to himself. 13, 4, 7, and then 3 here. Yes, that should be fine, I think. The man could not yet see the traveler standing at his doorstep, and it didn't seem as though he'd be easily distracted from whatever it was that he was doing. The old man was small in stature with a considerable bend in his back. He wore a dirt brown cloak which was tied at the waist with a piece of rope. His hair was cut fairly short and was a splotchy gray color. The traveler watched him for a few seconds and considered once again that he had made a wrong turn. How is it possible that this old man is up here? The traveler thought to himself. He looked down at the ground as an inchworm made its way across the toe of his boot. Are you going to stand there all day, or are you going to help me with my stew, young man? The old man intruded as the traveler looked up and saw a saggy and wrinkled face, not 2 inches away from his own. He was chewing on something and had lots of scraggly pieces of hair coming out from all directions on his jawline. The old man grabbed the traveler's arm and slowly dragged him inside as he shuffled across the floorboards. You know anything about making stews, boy? Can you cut vegetables, my young man? Yes, I can. Good, the old man replied quickly in a high, joyful inflection. Go on, slice up those cabbages and the carrots. I still need to count the rest of my supplies over here. It won't take more than 2 minutes. I'll be with you very shortly. The traveler put his head down and awkwardly walked over to a wooden counter, which had piles of vegetables lying on top of it. The counter was hidden behind the open door from the outside, which is why the traveler could not tell that the old man had been counting his vegetables when he arrived. Standing close to the counter, the traveler looked at the green and orange pile. The cabbage was wilted and the carrots were covered in dirt, and there was a small knife lying next to them which had a dull metal blade. The traveler grabbed hold of the knife and positioned a carrot onto the wooden countertop. Positioning the knife, he stuck the blade into the neck and then wiggled it until the leaves were cleanly cut away. He confusingly placed the carrot along with the leaves in a new pile, and then grabbed for another. He once again cut off the leaves, and then continued on for 3 more. After the third, the traveler picked up his head and looked to the right of where he was standing. His eyes widened as he saw his walking stick leaning in the corner. He glanced quickly behind himself at the old man before looking back at it. His eyebrows lowered as he stood grasping onto the knife. "That's my stick," he muttered, and then sharply chopped another carrot. "You like beets, young man?" the old man asked. "Yeah, I like beets," the traveler replied quietly. It wasn't true, though. He hated beets. He was focused on the stick, wondering how the old man nabbed it so quickly. Getting the rest of the vegetables prepared, the traveler continued to rush through his thoughts as the old man walked around, rambling on. It seemed as though he never took a breath, just always talking. His footsteps caused the floorboards to creak with every step. It was unbelievably irksome. After a couple of minutes, the talking and the creaking became background noise as the traveler continued to contemplate the walking stick in the corner. "Is it the right shape?" the traveler thought to himself. He looked over at it once again. "Yup, that's most certainly it, I'm sure." He firmly chopped through a head of cabbage, cutting it in 2 halves and pushing it aside. Looking at the pile, he sighed and grabbed another cabbage. The traveler had not yet fully worked out what was happening now. Everything seemed so out of place, so strange. The unnecessary fire was making the place terribly hot as the temperature outside continued to rise. The traveler noticed the sweat beginning to seep out of his pores, making his clothes damp with moisture. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand as he continued to cut. The old man walked over to him, placing his hand on his shoulder. "All right, thanks for helping out. Why don't you have a seat so we can talk?" he said. The traveler placed the knife on the counter and walked over to the small wooden table. The old man pulled out a chair for himself and sat down. The traveler did the same. "So, what are you doing up here so early?" the old man asked. "It's an ungrateful hour to be walking about." "I like being alone in the morning," the traveler said in a lowered voice. "Ah, I do as well," replied the old man. "It makes me feel like no one else exists, you know." The traveler looked up and saw a joyful grin on the old man's face. "Yes, I do know." He remembered standing in the gravel parking lot 2 hours earlier with the same notion bouncing around his head. We're lucky to have such thought, don't you think?" the old man asked. The traveler nodded. "Sometimes I convince myself that people don't exist. Sometimes I just sit here in my cabin and feel like the world is mine and that I can do whatever I please. Oh, here, have some tea." Once again, the traveler noticed the familiarity in the man's demeanor. He leaned back in his chair as the old man grabbed one of the empty cups that was sitting next to the teapot on the table and began to pour. The liquid poured out like sludge, with small chunks of unidentifiable substances splashing into the cup. The traveler ignored it as he continued to listen to the old man. "See, this idea that we all have to commit our lives to one another, it just simply bothers me." "Here we go," the traveler thought as the old man continued on. "I like to think that true progress lies in our own imaginations, and that life should be explored by dreaming about the impossible and reaching for ideas that help us to challenge our perceptions of reality. People think that if you have too much imagination, then you must be crazy. But there's a big difference between imagination and insanity, I'm sure of it. But all of these disorders and conditions and everyone telling you that there's something wrong with you, I just don't buy it for 1 second. I've been around crazy people and boy, do they stick out. But I've also seen the special ones, you know, the visionaries. I've experienced pure emotion from people who sit back in conversation and listen to the talkers. They're like receptacles for vocal garbage, these people, always wanting to listen but never being able to speak. Their voices are weak and unable to reveal their singularly spectacular character. These these are the ones that I am sad for, as I am sad for my own lack of confidence. The meek, the tired, these are the ones who should be reaching life's greatest feats of achievement. The others, they don't know, let me tell you. I know what's good for me, and that's enough. There are all these kids that have these great imaginations, and they need to be supported so that they don't lose their creativity when they grow old. They need to start changing the way that this society is being subjected because of life has become so dreary and predictable. I worked for a business once. Every day, all I wanted to do was wake up and do something else. I wanted variety. I wanted to have last night's dream become a reality. That was not something I felt comfortable giving up just because I was an adult. So what did I do? I left it all to explore my mind up here, on this mountain, by myself, goddammit. The words washed over the traveler as if he was speaking them through his own lips. He remembered the random drivel that had been flowing through his head all morning. The old man was hitting on something that felt far too familiar. Underneath the table, the traveler's legs began to shake on the ground, causing the floorboards to creak again. He was hearing each syllable in a way that made too much sense. The speech became a muffled mix, with each word wandering around the traveler's ears. The noise of the squeaky floor was resonating through the cabin. The traveler looked back at the walking stick before the old man caught his attention once again. "Are you ready for the stew, young man?" The traveler nodded, not speaking a word. His eyes were widened as if he had just awoken. "Go ahead, have some tea. You look kind of tired there," the old man insisted. The traveler grabbed the cup in front of him and sipped it slowly. It was the worst thing he had ever tasted. He forced it down before placing the cup back onto the table. The old man was attending the stew, which was cooking over the fire. "Do you mind me asking how you've been up here without anyone noticing?" the traveler asked the old man. "I mean, this can't be the first time that someone's seen your cabin." "You know, I don't think many people take the White Dot Trail. It's a little too long for most of the hikers. You're the first person I've seen in a very long time. But anyway, how long, if you don't mind me asking?" the traveler interrupted. "Oh, I'd say a couple of years or so. I don't mind it. I'm quite happy here. I have my thoughts to entertain me and the woods around me, and none of the stress that has plagued me for so many years before. There was a time in my life when I enjoyed congregating with those special ones, you know. Conversations made me happy, and I felt emotion for others. One look into the eyes of a good person, and that was it. I made a new friend. But eventually, the twinkle went away. The more I looked for the people who were glowing, the more I distanced myself from the ones who didn't. I got stranger while everyone else seemed to be more normal, and while I continued to fight for the dreamers, I felt more and more alone. I was frightened for so many years, but no longer." The traveler kept quizzically silent as the old man pushed his chair out and stood up. He walked over to the pot and gave it a smell as he continued talking. "I hope you don't mind stew so early in the morning. It's all I can really make up here, since all I have is this fire pit and pot. Sometimes I make a really good vegetable soup. If you want to stay, we could have that for dinner." "I really can't stay too long," he replied. The traveler was getting nervous and finding it difficult to make eye contact with the old man as he carried the pot over to the table, smiling. He placed it in front of the traveler and shoved a wooden ladle between the hunks of vegetables. Steam was pouring out into the traveler's face. "Well, I insist you stay. Here, fill up your bowl, young man." The traveler grabbed the ladle and looked inside the pot to find a pile of vegetables lying in a thick puddle of sticky broth. He grabbed a modest scoop and plopped it into the bowl. Not more than a single small chunk of potato fell in along with a thick brown mush. He searched for more potatoes and carrots with a second scoop, but came up with only broth. The old man watched as he hesitantly considered a third. Instead, he placed the ladle into the pot and grabbed the small wooden spoon beside his bowl. "Is that all you'll have? No more for you?" the old man asked. The traveler shook his head and placed his spoon into the bowl. The old man grunted as he grabbed the ladle and poured 5 generous scoops. "But, you know, the one thing that really disgusts me about people," the old man said, continuing the conversation. "The arrogance. It's just so draining to me as a man with humble tastes. You don't see me shaking my beliefs around in your face or yelling at you because you don't like my stew." The old man let out a weak little laugh that dug deep beneath the traveler's skin. please, the traveler closed his eyes for 5 seconds before turning his head to the corner of the room and pointing his finger towards his walking stick. The stick! The traveler shouted as he rose up from his chair and shook his finger. That's my stick, old man. You took it. I'm sorry, that just so happens to be my stick, the old man politely replied as he stayed sitting in his chair. That's bullshit. You stole my walking stick and I want it back. No, I don't think you will. I quite like it. I think it would be best if I kept it here. Now sit down and eat your stew. So you admit it. You did take it. Did you know that it was mine? Were you planning for me to come find you? The old man looked down into his bowl of stew before lifting his head and replying. You see, dear boy, I don't mind you passing through, but you've taken something that does not belong to you. No, I won't hear any of this nonsense, so please sit down and eat this nice meal that I prepared for you. Burning with anger, the traveler grabbed his bowl of stew and flung it towards the old man's head. The old man shouted and bounced out of his chair as the mushy vegetables burned his wrinkled face. He squealed and shuffled towards the traveler, hands covering his eyes. What have you done? The old man shrieked. Backing across the room, the traveler hit the counter and felt the handle of the dull knife behind him. He readied his hand and grasped firmly onto the blade. The old man was hunched over, still covering his face, and continuing to moan. Losing his footing, he tripped on the back leg of the table and knocked the pot of stew onto the ground. He let out a cracking scream as the pot struck the floor and spilled the thick brown liquid across the room. The traveler jumped with fear as the old man fell face first and banged his head on the floor. He wailed and rolled around in agony, frantically trying to get himself up, but too badly burned to gather the strength. After a few minutes of helpless, raspy shouting, his voice gave out and he became silent. Lying face down in the stew, he began to sob like a child, with bubbles frothing from his mouth. The traveler relaxed his hand from the grip of the knife and placed it back on the counter. Looking over to the corner of the room, he reached for the walking stick and slowly headed towards the door. He exited the cabin without speaking a word or looking at the old man's stinking pine needle broth-soaken body. 7 a.m. Alright, so that was chapter 4 of The Walk. Thank you guys very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that one. That is probably one of my favorite chapters in the entire story, so I hope you guys enjoyed it as well. I wanted to talk about it a little bit before I ended the video. Of course, this is probably what you consider the inciting incident of the story. The traveler comes across this cabin and finds an old man, and there's a huge monologue in the middle of it, which took me a while to write. And if you enjoyed that monologue, I really tried to make it full of substance, and I want it to be an uncomfortable kind of thing. This old man, of course, has been alone up there for a long time, so he's got a lot of interesting thoughts, and I think it's something that I think people can kind of connect with, even if it does seem a little bit uncomfortable to hear, and I think that kind of led up to the climax of the situation. Of course, so if you have any, any comments about this chapter, I would love to hear them. Hopefully the story's going to start getting a little bit more exciting, and going to focus a little bit more on an actual story rather than kind of the expositional chapters where I was talking about the environment and the setting mostly. So hopefully this is giving you some insight into this main character, as well as now the second character. This is now the only other character that we've seen so far. The traveler up to this point has been the only character in the story. So it's a very interesting introduction. I like the old man a lot as a character, and again, there is a familiarity that I wanted to portray with this story. If you didn't hear what I said in chapter 3, this kind of situation, running into an old man in the woods in the cabin, is almost a cliche, but I think I did that on purpose because I want this to be a familiar situation, even though it's uncomfortable and a little intense. Hopefully, I there's going to be a sense of understanding, hopefully, from the reader. So, again, if you have any ideas about what might happen in the next chapter, I would love to hear it.